Hey, Eric Clay here from Own Your Future Podcast, your local mortgage guy. Today we have on Rick Steehler from Empowered Energy, and today we're going to talk about solar panels. He's going to give us all the information regarding solar from A to Z.
Love it. I love it. Eric, thanks for having me on, man.
Thanks for coming on. Tell everybody a little bit about yourself and what you do.
Yeah, so basically I'm originally from Buffalo, New York, and I moved to Rhode Island about 3 years ago. Was when I kind of got into the solar industry, and I really started to excel at it and got promoted right away to run my own office in Burlington, Mass. And I'm kind of racing back and forth nowadays from Massachusetts back to Rhode Island because I got a lot of homes to help out with all the electric bills kind of increasing for all the homeowners and stuff like that. So as I've done more and more solar, it's very commonly done through referral-based stuff. So my job is to drive around all I can and help people cut their expenses the best I can. So that's been my journey the last 3 years or so.
Pretty cool. So solar is obviously a hot topic today with Tesla and all this going electric and everything like that. And a lot of people have questions about it. They don't know if it's good for them. They don't know if it's the best thing. And obviously, being in New England, we have interesting weather, snow, clouds, cold. So does the cold, especially as we're heading into a cold weekend right now, does the cold impact the performance of solar panels?
The cold itself, no, but definitely the winter months, because you're getting a lot less sunlight during winter months. So yeah, during your winter months, when we're in the northern hemisphere, you're going to have less daylight, which means less energy from your solar panels. But the cool thing about the area is when you take into account the full year, it tends to make sense. But yeah, in the winter, you're going to be just developing a little less energy.
Awesome. Now, snow is obviously a big topic as well. So snow, sometimes we get, a coating, sometimes we get an inch, sometimes we're getting a foot. So how quickly do you have to remove snow from solar panels so that you don't damage them or you don't affect the performance of the solar?
Yeah, honestly, what I tell people, like I said, most of our base is in the Northeast, where you're only having a few days where the solar panels are actually covered with snow. I'm from Buffalo, so I feel like if we did more solar in Buffalo, it's covered for months, but yeah. At least in the Northeast, you're going to have a few days where you're going to have the snow on your panels. We actually tell people hey, don't even worry about trying to take the snow off and stuff. We wouldn't want you guys to damage the panels. You're just going to develop a lot less energy when you have the snow on your panels. And it was already in the winter when you're producing a lot less anyways. So it's okay to have a few days in the winter where you're not producing much. Just because when you take out, like I said, when you take, the full year usage of what you're developing, it's quite substantial and everything like that. So rather than damaging your panels and worrying about maintenance and every time it snows getting up there and trying to get them off, we just say hey, leave the snow on there. It'll when snow melts away, it seems to melt off the solar panels to start just because they're usually black on black solar panels. So you'll notice when I look at them in the morning, it's I can tell when the sun comes out and it's starting to melt, they kind of melt off the panels first, then off the roof kind of second. But yeah, you're going to have a couple days where it's covered up and up. There's obviously less light traveling to those solar panels to develop you energy. So yeah, definitely those days. But yeah, absolutely.
So you mentioned not damaging the solar panels. So that kind of leads into another question that I had is with a lot of roofs, I see a lot of homes, and sometimes you get some of that little growth on the roofs. And I would imagine that that sometimes you might actually get maybe a little organic growth on the solar panels. So do you tell people not to clean those solar panels? Are they supposed to be clean? What do you do for maintenance on those?
Yeah, as far as maintenance, I honestly haven't seen the growth on the solar panels. The only thing I have noticed, obviously snow, but the only thing else I noticed was pollen. And a lot of pollen can build up depending on, what situation, with what trees are around and stuff like that. And we actually say the same thing for that. I mean, if you really wanted to, you could get your hose and wash them down to make it look better, I guess, if you wanted to. But yeah, not overly suggested. You'll get a little less production. We usually tell people, hey, just wait for the next rain to wash them off. If it looks terrible, if you got a lot of pollen in your area, then absolutely you can, hose it down if you want. We do say hey, you wouldn't want to pressure wash or anything, just to make sure to protect your system. I mean, these things are really durable. They actually test them by throwing baseballs at them. But yeah, it's like, hey, just to prevent damages and stuff like that, just I wouldn't pressure wash them. If they were covered in pollen and it was an arm's reach away somehow and you wanted to clean them off to make it look better and they're on the front of your house, go for it, you know? So
perfect. So another question that I've heard people ask about, or at least talk about, is you're obviously putting the solar panels on the roofs, and people are concerned on, you know, the structural integrity of the roof after you do so. So how often, or maybe not how often is the best question, do solar panels in some way damage the roof? Do you have to make modifications to the roof to support the solar panels? Is that something that really comes into consideration?
yes, absolutely. That's like some of the main like qualifying features of a house. Not every single house can go solar. It's like the numbers always tend to make sense. It's kind of always a no-brainer, but the trick is actually having a house that can qualify to have them. And like I said, the main way I have a house disqualify for solar is if the roof can't handle the weight of the panels and the weight plus snow. So if it can't do that, sometimes they just have to disqualify the project. Also, I know probably most solar companies do this. Our company does this, but if let's say the home needs a structural upgrade, some collar ties, unit to kind of just be able to handle the structure, we'll actually like cover that cost for the homeowner. And then that way, you know, you're protected there. The thing is, there's a lot of liability that the solar company takes on. So it's like, we're not going to, you know, most companies aren't going to install on a roof that wouldn't be able to handle the weight or anything like that. So that's where it kind of comes down to some of those upgrades that you can do to get put on. And it could be the deal too, where they tell you, hey, after we took a look at your roof, it looks like you guys are going to need a structural upgrade and we got to put, you know, a couple $1,000 in the project. Could work that way depending on who you're dealing with. So
interesting. So another question people have is, how do you determine whether or not it makes sense? Now, you've said a few times that it seems to always make sense, but I'm assuming there's some type of formula that you guys plug numbers into or whatnot.
Yeah. So it's actually quite simple. The formula that you can use at home is kind of simple. There's a couple factors, right? Formula is what area are you in? Is it producing a lot of sunlight? That's actually one factor, and it's kind of a small factor. A lot of people think, oh, Northeast, we're not getting a lot of sun. That's the markets that I'm more familiar with. But one of the biggest factors to see if your house makes sense is how much are you paying for your electricity, right? If you're talking about making it financial sense, here's the thing. I've done some projects in South Carolina and some in the Northeast, and it makes more sense in the Northeast. I know that sounds crazy, right? But the truth of the matter is we pay in the Northeast way more for electricity because we have it. A lot of it comes from out of state. What we're doing is we're using more energy than we're generating here. So it's really expensive. And people in the Northeast have seen, you know, in Rhode Island or Massachusetts, people overall are now, after big rate increases, are now paying over even 40 cents a kilowatt. I've seen some people paying 48 cents a kilowatt with National Grid. Whereas when I've done some appointments in South Carolina, for example, they're paying 11 cents a kilowatt. So when you factor in the equation of, hey, how much you're spending versus how much you're producing, all of a sudden, you know, when you factor over those things in, it actually makes more sense to do something up here than somewhere down south if their electric rates are lower. So it's how much are you paying for your electricity? And then, you know, B, how much sunlight are you getting type of thing. And it turns out so yeah, that's why like the Northeast is really good for solar. I did a trip to Hawaii a couple years ago. Hawaii is the highest electric rates of any state. And it was funny. Every single house had solar. Like every house in Hawaii had solar. You know, it was that or they're paying 60 cents a kilowatt. So,
well, they are an island, right?
Yeah.
You got to ship in your natural gas. You got to ship in your coal, whatever you're using to produce energy. You got to ship it in. So yeah, it would be more expensive, I would imagine. So yeah, that makes sense.
Absolutely.
It's crazy because National Grid, I think, on the residential side went up to 33 cents a kilowatt hour, and I think
that's for the supply only.
That's for the supply only, because then you have the delivery, which is like 17 cents or something like that, right? Or like 14 cents. It's like 14
cents.
It
used to be like right before this upgrade, it used to be a 50-50 split. Like half of what you're paying for is the energy and half of what you're paying is to get that energy to you. But then, yeah, they upped that supply rate up to 33 cents. So that's where, like you said, like people are in that like 42 to 48 cents type of thing. It usually depends on your town and everything like that. So
Absolutely. So how do you determine how many solar panels a house needs? So I would imagine that a 1,500 square foot home needs a lot less panels than a 2,500 square foot home. Is that correct?
Uh, it depends, because it's not really how big the home is, but although that kind of can have a direct factor. But it just has to do with how much energy you're using, and how much energy that you plan to use. And also there might be, whenever I'm saying stuff about government programs and stuff, just to know it can change state to state, with different programs, or how things work with different utility companies can all be different per utility company. But I'm sorry, what was your main question again? Let me get back to that.
It was like, how do you determine how many solar panels that a house needs? And I was thinking that the bigger the house, the more panels it needs, but I'm assuming it's more complex than that.
Yeah. It's simple. It's just how much energy you're using in the future. So basically, the first thing that we'll need to see if the house is a good fit is someone's electric bill, because on their electric bill, it's actually going to have their last year, like the last month by month, their last year's usage on their electric bill. And we can use that data to figure out how much they spend in a year, because you're going to spend most of the time, you're going to spend more in the summer, less in the winter. Or if you have electric heat, you're going to spend way more in the winter. So this gets us an average of your full year. And then usually you want to get enough solar panels. I always try to shoot for about 105 to 110% of your usage, just because the panels degrade with time. So that way, 25 years down the line, you still don't have an electric bill type of thing. So that's kind of how we determine it's just how much energy. And then it also has to do with, how the roof orients with the sun, the pitch angles of the roof. So they do a LiDAR report to figure out how much sunlight these panels could be producing. And they match that with your electric bill to figure out how many panels would be right for you.
Perfect. So have you ever had anybody that needed to cut down trees to make solar panels work? Because obviously in Massachusetts, we got trees everywhere. And so I'm assuming you've had to cut down a few trees, correct?
Yeah, absolutely. And it really depends on the situation. Usually the numbers can just about make sense for everyone. If you really love your tree in your yard, you might the numbers are probably still going to make sense keeping your tree. It really depends on where the tree is located, how much it's shading. For example, a tree in the north is not going to shade your roof at all. In the east-west, it'll shade it a little bit on the roofs that face towards the east and west. Or if you have a tree that's smack dab in the south and it blocks the entire roof from the south, that's probably going to make a lot more sense for that tree to go, for the numbers to make sense. But the best thing you can do if you're a homeowner is cool, reach out to a guy like me or a solar company and be like, hey, does it make sense? And does it make sense with the tree or without the tree? And you might realize, hey, if you love your tree in the front yard, it might affect your production a bit, but it still might give you a lot of savings.
Now, can you set up a house where the house, in most days of the year, runs completely on solar? Like you don't need any energy from like National Grid or EverSource.
Yeah, it depends how you think of it. Most homes I'm able to cover over 100% of their usage. Sometimes I've done solar projects where it's covered as low as like 25% of their usage, but they have a massive electric bill, and that 25% is still saving them a ton of money. But yeah, it's just kind of the thing where, it's so sometimes I struggle how to figure out how to explain things. Sorry, what was the question one more time so I can...
I was just wondering if you can get a house that runs strictly on solar most of the time.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, so a lot of times what can happen too is you're connected with the grid. It's very beneficial to be connected to the grid. You get a lot of benefits when you go off grid. It's very expensive to get a lot of batteries to be able to hold yourself up. And technically, how it kind of works is you're sending, technically in the Northeast is how it works in the Northeast, you're technically sending all your energy to the grid, and then they're using the energy you sent to credit your bill at a 1-to-1 ratio, meaning like the exact amount of energy you're sending is covering your supply and your delivery charge. And that's, like I said, that's how it works in the Northeast with these utility companies. It might change in different areas of the U.S.
So you made a good point. Like it's expensive to get in a bunch of batteries, but up here, like with a storm, sometimes electricity gets knocked out, and then people have, maybe home generators or maybe they have the little wheel generators that they can roll out of their shed or their garage and plug in so that a few things are working. Do your solar panels work while the power is knocked out?
That's a good question. So the answer is they turn off when the power goes out, because most of the time where it's most beneficial for a homeowner is you're still connected to the grid, and there's actually a breaker that will turn the solar off. That way they can fix everything safely with the grid, and then it kind of automatically turns on after the power outage type of thing. And if that was a big issue, I know I have homeowners that like in Cape Cod lose power all the time. To where it does make sense to get one of these battery systems to back up the things that you need. And it honestly just serves like a generator. So basically how a battery works is they're super expensive, but the government covers a big portion of it. And sometimes there's other added benefits depending on your town to having a battery. But yeah, basically it would cover the appliances you choose when the power goes out, but you need a battery to be used as kind of a generator. If you just kind of have solar connected to the grid, which is usually the best financial option, you'll still lose power like everybody else. So I would always ask your consultant to be like, hey, like I always ask people, hey, how often do you lose power? And if they lose power a lot, then I would suggest a battery. And cases where they don't, then it's like, cool, it's kind of expensive, and somebody already has a generator or something. It's probably not the best financial decision.
Oh, okay. Interesting. So how do you determine the cost of a system? And I'm assuming it's probably related to how many solar panels you had, but I'm assuming it might be a little bit more complicated than that.
Yeah, it can be a little bit more complicated than that. There's a lot of things that kind of come into play with a solar project. Honestly, until everything's installed and up, sometimes solar companies don't know how much that project's going to be with any sort of upgrades. Every project is so customized with like how much conduit and where things need to run. Every project is extremely customized. So basically, industry-wide, it's kind of like a price per watt. And what that means is like how many solar panels, it's like a percentage of that. And just to give you guys a quick gist, I don't know how you guys can calculate this, but basically, I know a long time ago, solar used to be about $12 per watt. And when all the subsidies and technology got way better, it got down to about $3 a watt years and years and years ago. And it's been just kind of creeping up with inflation. So the cost of solar is at the point where now it's kind of only be increasing in cost. So like the earlier you get in, the less cost it'll be. But now it's creeping to about $4 a watt, I would say, is pretty much a standard in the industry at the moment. And when you tally that up, that's pretty expensive. But how these government program works is they use this federal tax credit to like cover your down payments for you. Is kind of how most solar companies kind of model it. That way you can switch over to solar power for actually nothing out of pocket, which is really cool. And that way you can actually cash flow day one. Most people can cash flow day one, or at least in the Northeast. So
yeah. So you mentioned per watt. And I know that it's going to vary from house to house, but what's an average house? How many watts does an average house usually need?
Yeah, I'm finding around here, it's most people need about on average a 10 kilowatt system, I would say, for Massachusetts. I noticed in Rhode Island, usually it's a little bit less, like 8 kilowatts. Down south, it might be more like 12 or 13 kilowatts. They use a lot more AC, obviously. So yeah, you just got to think like, and it depends the system size. If you have a very shady house, you're going to need a little bit more panels to cover your full house. Or if you get blasted with sunlight, you're going to need less panels to cover that amount of usage as well. So it kind of comes down to their light report and everything like that too.
Interesting. So I know just from talking to you before that you're a huge fan of solar. Obviously, you work for a solar company. You think it's great.
Yep.
So tell people 2 disadvantages of solar.
Yeah, definitely. I would say, so 2 disadvantages. I mean, 99% of people that I've signed up with solar, nothing out of pocket, and then they change from a rent payment to like a fixed payment and a cheaper fixed payment. But the only issue or disadvantage with that is maybe in the winter months, if you didn't have like electric heat and you don't really spend too much energy, that fixed payment might be higher in, let's say, like December, January. or if you have a more shady system, you might have like 3.5 months where it's slightly more expensive. But then obviously the summer months completely kind of make up for that from you. So when you do the full year, you're ahead. But if you're not as, I was going to say, if you're not as good at budgeting, where like you're used to paying a lot less in the winter, it's going to be a fixed rate. So you're going to kind of, just like a mortgage payment for a house, that's actually kind of an advantage, because you're going to be paying the same amount for your electricity costs every single month. So I would say that's a negative if just, hey, for a couple months, you might be spending a little bit more money, depending on the situation. I mean, if they have a perfect outdoor solar, maybe they're still saving a lot of money, even in the couple winter months there. And another disadvantage I would say is, for a lot of people, it's just like a big fear of change. The numbers always make sense. It's just like, hey, there's this thing going on in my roof. This is my home, right? And that's why that these things, I have like crazy amounts of warranties and checks and balances, and which brings me to the next downside of solar energy is just expect that, hey, from the time you say, hey, let's go, let's do this, I want solar panels, to like, all right, we're flipping the switch to it's on. There's just such a high demand for solar right now, and there's so many moving pieces. We have to, go to the utility companies and get interconnection. We have to get permitting. We have to pass all the house inspections, and there's rules on top of rules. So between like saying yes to install, usually is like 30 to 120 days. And a lot of companies right now are even in the, 3 to 8 months, even before you're flipped on. So it can just be frustrating because you're like, hey, this is awesome, we want it. And it's like you're less enthused 6 months down the line and the panels aren't on your house yet. So it's just, if it's something that you're thinking about wanting, it may be good to at least look into it and just understand, to have the expectation that we don't know. Most, like from my experience now, what I've learned is like, we don't know how long it's going to take. No solar company will ever know like how long your project will take. There's a bunch of hiccups that could come up. Supply chain issues can come up. I remember like Omicron added like 5 months to every project when that hit. And so just have a very understanding expectation when it comes to time of a solar project.
Yeah. So what's the typical break-even point? Like, hey, you invest in solar panels and 5 years, 10 years down the road, that's your break-even, and now you're ahead.
Yep. That's a great question. So honestly, like I said, about 99% of my customers pay nothing up front. So it's kind of hard to believe, but it's a day one break even for most people in the Northeast or my markets. They literally pay nothing out of pocket, and basically you're trading your electric bill for a mortgage payment for your solar. And just like you would trade your rent payment when you're renting for a house, and then when you own a house, you have a fixed mortgage payment. That's the same. The cool thing is the mortgage payment for solar is going to be much cheaper than what they were renting their energy from their utility company for. And any of the upfront costs are kind of covered through the loan. So it's like a zero down loan, right? And then that doesn't start till 2 months after you're installed. So actually you're trading out an expensive electric bill for a less expensive mortgage payment for your solar. So your ROI is actually like infinity if you were to calculate it, because it's day one. Because when you're calculating your return on investment, well, hey, I invested $0 up front, and now I've traded my $200 bill for a $150 solar payment, right? But let's say, in your 1%, if, you got a ton of cash laying around, like how fast of an investment would be if I didn't, put it through a solar loan with all these programs. And the answer there, like I said, depends on every single house. But if you're taking into account your electric bills going up about 4% a year, and just for the history, the past 3 years in the Northeast, it's gone up over 10% a year. This year, for most people, it's gone up over 50% as far as their inflation rate for their electric bill. But if you take into account a 4% inflation rate, most people would probably break even. The average house around here in the Northeast probably break even in about 10 years or so. So that's actually a very fast ROI. And what I like to compare it to is like a Roth IRA, right? So a Roth IRA is known for having like great return on investment, right? But the thing is, you can't touch that money for 25 years, right? Yep. And let's say you couldn't touch any of your solar savings for 25 years, it would be much, much faster than a Roth IRA. And you're getting that money every single month from your electric bill. You don't have to wait 25 years to touch that money. So if you learn a lot about money and investing and yada yada, what we all understand is today's dollars is worth a lot much more than future dollars. So you're saving this every single month rather than just, hey, 25 years down the line, now I'm saving that money, which is about less than half of actually the worth of that money, if that makes sense. Yeah, maybe listen to some good like Bigger Pockets podcasts or something to learn how money works if this made no sense to you at all. So, but yeah.
So my next question had to do between own and leasing. And so I'm a big fan of owning. I'm a mortgage person, so I generally like to own versus lease. The podcasters own your future. So are you seeing more people own? Are you seeing more people lease? And which one do you think is better?
Yeah, I primarily would pretty much only do ownership, and I'll cover both. That's a great question, though. I would say in the past, leasing has been more prevalent, and there's a sad truth to that, and there's some good truth to it. It's the sad truth is how the government programs work. When you lease, the solar company gets all of the government benefits. And you still save money as the homeowner, and it's still a great thing. You're helping the environment, and your electric bills, you're paying overall a lot less, but you don't own that system at the end of it. Also, when you lease, if you don't have a fixed payment, it actually has an escalator. So every year you're going to pay more and more and more for the solar. And then at the end of the day, you don't own it or get any of the government programs. Like I said, it's still beneficial. If you're in a lease, don't freak out. It was probably really good at the time. A positive thing to the lease is if they're not producing, the solar company gets a lot of the benefit from the solar actually producing. So you might get some faster turnaround time. Maybe if there was an issue with maintenance or something, they'll want to get out right away and fix it. Whereas, if you have a slow company that you own the panels, it might take them a couple weeks to a month to get out to fix an issue if something were to be wrong. But I think just ownership, if it was my home, the second I can get a home, which, is hopefully soon, I am obviously getting solar because I don't want to rent my energy through the utility company. I'd rather pay way less, but I would definitely want to own. And it's the same reason that you guys probably want to own a house versus rent your house, right? You're paying money into yourself, into your asset versus, paying your utility company where you're just lighting it on fire. And I always tell myself, even if solar was more money, let's say I had a $100 electric bill and my solar payment was $200, even if it was double the cost, I'd rather pay myself $200 a month and have an asset than pay the utility company $100 a month and it's gone. And just the cool part is solar is almost always less expensive, which is cool.
So I have a little experience with her at being a mortgage professional. I deal with it a lot when the houses have the solar panels on it. When it first started, there was some issues to get the solar stuff transferred over, and there was issues with the leases and stuff. All those issues with the leases and the agreements, those all seem to be gone. I haven't seen any issues with them in years. One thing I would tell people who are watching is if you're buying a house that has solar and you're taking over the payment, that payment does have to be included in your debt to income ratio and will determine whether or not you qualify for the house. With the lease, there's two types of leases. There's a power purchase agreement, and then there's the lease payment that you pay every month. And so if it's a power purchase agreement, it's like a utility bill, so that it doesn't get included in your debt to income. And then if it's not, if it's a regular, just a required monthly payment, that payment does get included. Now, also one of the things that we have to do is we also have to get the lease transferred, or the loan has to be transferred to the new person. I haven't recently run into any issues with getting those transferred. It seems like the credit requirements are pretty easy. And have you noticed any issues with getting leases and loans transferred to the new owner?
In my experience, from what I've heard, I've only had a few of my customers sell their house after, and I've actually had some of the realtors calling me, and then they're like, "Oh man, I want this for my house now." But yeah, it's easier when you deal with someone like yourself who's been through a leasing program, been through the transfer, been with a realtor that has dealt with this. At this point in time in the Northeast, you're going to deal in Massachusetts, pretty much almost any realtor or mortgage person should know how the transfers work. But if they're not experienced with this, maybe your realtor will probably be a little frustrated with the process, just at more things that they need to do. But yeah, from what I heard, it's like, hey, leases were a little bit harder to transfer to a new homeowner. But yeah, like you said it perfectly, where like, hey, ownership, they got to take on the new payment. Cool thing, which I read on Zillow. Zillow came out with an article. But yeah, you do have to qualify for that to take over that person's solar payment, but you pick up the savings where they left off. And I read this article on Zillow from 2019. But houses in Massachusetts sell for 4.1% more and somehow 17% faster with solar. I thought that was a really cool article. I was like, oh, wow, because I figured a lot of people would be just kind of scared of it, like scared of the unknown. And that does definitely happen. So if you're a realtor, you're probably pretty frustrated when somebody's like, oh, this house has solar and it's got this extra payment. No, thanks. I don't want it. But then I look at the statistics and I'm like, oh, okay. Like, well, people are going to have that pain when they go to move. They might have a couple people definitely say, hey, we don't like solar. What's this extra payment? We don't even want to look into it. You'll probably deal with that emotional toll when you go to sell the house. But then the stats say, hey, you're selling it 17% faster. You're selling it 4.1% more. So yeah, that's another thing to keep into account with home transfer is might add a headache. But other than that, it's overall going to save and make you more money, which is cool. So.
Yeah. And I can't obviously guarantee it, but I haven't seen an issue with any type of solar transfer in, I don't know, it's been hundreds and hundreds of loans. Like, I mean, years ago, like I've done a few of them, and it's been years since I can even remember there ever being an issue. Now, we're almost at the end. I had one last kind of question for you, and you mentioned it a couple times, where there's a program where people can have no money down to get the solar. Tell people a little bit about that program.
Yeah. So there's a lot of great like federal and state level programs. Even town by town can have some extra programs. But the main program that anyone can get, probably that's listening to this, is the federal incentive. If you guys heard, there's been this federal incentive that's actually been around for a long time, and it usually gets reduced every year. When I got into the industry, the government would cover like 26% of anything to do with your solar project. So if you needed a roof or tree removal, you bundle this in the project, you guys get 26% off. But there was a bill that was passed. Hey, for the next 10 years, the government's covering 30% of anything to do with the project. So like I said, that includes, if you have an old roof, it's really smart to bundle that in with solar. You don't want to pay full price for a roof and then go solar after. You want to put those things together and really get the discounts off these things. So 30% off everything to do with the system, and like anything at all that can get bundled into the project. That's kind of how that works. And to qualify for that, you need to be paying taxes. So it's a tax credit type of thing. So as long as you're working, paying taxes, usually I would say 99% of the time, as long as you're paying taxes, you're working a normal job, you'll be able to get all this tax credit back. And they use that to, like I said, they kind of use that preemptively to cover your down payments for you. That way you can, go to owning solar for nothing out of pocket, which is kind of a huge major benefit. And like I said, this program is around for the next 10 years now. So for the next 10 years, you get a solar system, 30% off all of it from the government, which is really great. In addition to that, too, like if you are, let's say you're listening and you have an Eversource bill, or you live in Nantucket, there's what they call the SMART program that is kind of running out. But basically what that does, you actually get a bonus check every month for the next 10 years, usually in the $10 to $50 range, depending on how much energy you're producing. And though that program is called the SMART program, it'll probably be pretty much closed out pretty soon. It closed out with National Grid, I would say maybe about a year ago. And then Eversource, it's on its last couple block levels. So that's a cool thing. And some towns are even known to have SRACs where you get some money back. And some towns even have like some big rebates for going solar. So literally different town to town, utility company to utility company. There could be added benefits. I don't nearly know them all. I'm pretty familiar with all of them in the Northeast. But yeah, you don't really know until you get a guy like me over to really do the research and show you what you can get.
So I think I have one last quick question for you. Is there any difference between somebody's primary residence and an investment property or a second home?
It can. So luckily you can get this federal tax. It's my understanding that you can keep using this federal tax credit as much as you want. There's not really a limit to it, to my understanding. And then, but if you want to finance solar projects, you can finance your primary and your secondary. So anything other than like 2 properties, then you'd have to pay cash out of pocket for the solar system type of thing. But yeah, that would be the main thing. So it's like 2 properties you'll be able to finance. Other than that, it's cash out of pocket if you want to do it to all your investment properties and stuff like that. But would suggest it. It would be a smart move.
Awesome. So Rick, thank you for coming on and sharing your wealth of knowledge on this topic. It's a very hot topic right now. If somebody had questions about solar, tell my viewers how they might get in touch with you so that they can ask you those questions.
Yeah. So they can, if they know you guys personally, they can reach out to you, and obviously you guys can shoot them my way. But yeah, the best way to get a hold of me, I'm just gonna leave my contact info. I think that's the best way to do it, is shoot me a text or a call. I got a 585 number, 585-507-9176. You can also log on our website. It's at empowerenergysolutions.co, I think. You could also just Google Empower Energy Solutions. But I would say just contacting me out the gate, because like I said, not every house qualifies. So if you just contact me and send over your electric bill, I'll be like, cool, hey, I'll check this out for you. If it makes sense, I'll come over and show you how this works. If it doesn't make sense, I'll just call you and be like, probably doesn't make sense, man. Totally. But I think that would be if somebody was at least like, if somebody had an old roof and wanted to think about this for the future or anything, I would say shoot me a call as soon as you can. And now would be the time, because we can try to push to get people's projects in by the summer where you're developing the most energy. You know, a lot of people think about these sort of things when they get their big bills in the summer, then they're installed in the winter. And it's like, cool, be proactive, be ahead of your year 2023. And at least, I always say, at least check this out, because it could be one of the best financial decisions of your life.
Awesome. Well, hey, thank you, my friend, and everybody else. Remember to like, share, and subscribe. And thank you for watching Own Your Future podcast.